You are watching Crime Files America.
She was 9 years old. She had a smile that could light up a room, a heart full of kindness, and 7 small boxes of candy mints tucked under her arm. She kissed her dog goodbye, grabbed a quick snack, and walked out the front door of her home on a perfectly ordinary Friday afternoon. And she never came back. For 63 years, the man who took her life walked free. He worked regular jobs, lived among regular people, and died with his secret buried so deep that an entire city had almost given up on ever finding the truth. Almost. Because somewhere in a freezer in a crime laboratory, a tiny fragment of evidence had been waiting patiently for science to catch up to evil. And when it finally did, everything changed. My name is your narrator, and this is Crime Files America, the channel that refuses to let the forgotten stay forgotten. Before we go any further into this story, I need you to do something for me right now. Pause for just 1 second and look down at that subscribe button. If you have been watching this channel and you have never hit that button, I want you to really think about that. Every story we tell on this channel, every victim we give a voice to, every family we fight for, exists because of the people who chose to support this work. If you leave today without subscribing, you may never find your way back to this channel. And these stories, these real people, deserve to be heard. So do not let that happen. Subscribe to Crime Files America right now, hit the notification bell, and make sure you never miss another case. Now drop a comment below and tell me, where in the world are you watching this right now, and what time is it over there? I want to know exactly who is staying up late or waking up early to watch this with me. Let me know in the comments. This is the story of Candy Rogers, and I promise you, by the time this is over, you will never forget her name. To understand this story, you first need to understand the world that Candy Rogers grew up in. Spokane is a city in the state of Washington, in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. It is a city defined by natural beauty, by the Spokane River that flows through its heart, by dense forests on its edges, by a downtown full of culture and community. In the 1950s, it was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other, where children played freely in the streets, where parents felt safe enough to let their little ones walk the neighborhood alone. It was the kind of city where something like this was never supposed to happen. Candy Rogers was born in 1950 to a couple named Elaine and Carl Rogers. She was their only child, and from the very beginning, she was deeply and completely adored by both of them. Elaine was a school teacher, calm and steady and devoted. Carl was present and loving, and little Candy grew up wrapped in the warmth of parents who treasured every single moment with her. But as Candy grew, her parents grew apart. At some point during her early childhood, Elaine and Carl's marriage came to an end. The details of why were never fully made public, but the result was that the family split. Candy stayed with her mother. Carl moved on. And Elaine, now a single mother working as a school teacher, committed herself entirely to making sure her daughter had a full and happy life. She succeeded. Those who knew Candy in the late 1950s described her in almost identical terms, no matter who you asked. She was friendly. She was warm. She was the kind of child who made you feel good just by being in the same room as her. She laughed easily, loved deeply, and carried herself with a light that seemed almost too bright for the world around her. By 1959, Candy was 9 years old and in the 4th grade at Holmes Elementary School. She was doing well academically and had a good group of friends. But one of the things that made her especially proud was her membership in a youth organization called the Bluebirds. The Bluebirds were the junior branch of the Camp Fire Girls, a national youth organization that focused on community service, personal development, outdoor adventure, and education. Candy had joined the group with enthusiasm and had thrown herself into every single activity it offered: camping trips, hikes, community events, fundraisers, all of it. She showed up fully every single time. She was growing into someone remarkable. She was 9 years old, and her whole life was ahead of her. And then came Friday, March the 6th, 1959. It was a Friday, which meant the weekend was just beginning and Candy had plans. She was looking forward to spending time with her friends the following day, a Saturday full of the kind of simple joys that 9-year-olds live for. But first, she had something she wanted to take care of. The Bluebirds were in the middle of a fundraising drive, and the goal was to raise money for one of their upcoming events, and the way they were doing it was by selling campfire mints, small boxes of chocolate that members were expected to sell door to door in their neighborhoods. Candy had been given 7 boxes to sell, and she was determined to sell every single one of them. She came home from school that afternoon, dropped her backpack, and immediately started getting ready to head back out. She asked her mother, Elaine, for permission to go sell her mints in the neighborhood. Elaine said yes. But before Candy walked out the door, Elaine reminded her of the rule that never changed, no matter how many times she had said it before. Be home before dark. It was a rule Candy had always followed without question. Elaine had never had to worry about it. But still, as every mother does, and she said it one more time. Be home before dark, sweetheart. Candy nodded, grabbed an oatmeal cookie as a quick snack, played for a few minutes with the family dog, picked up her 7 boxes of campfire mints, and stepped out the front door. The time was approximately 4:00 in the afternoon. There were other girls from her age group out that same day, also selling chocolates door to door in the neighborhood. Candy joined them for a while. Several residents later confirmed that they had seen her that afternoon, walking the streets with her boxes of mints, smiling, knocking on doors, doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing. And then, at some point, she simply wasn't there anymore. Nobody saw exactly what happened. Nobody saw the moment everything changed. There was no scream, no commotion, no alarm raised in real time. At one moment she was there, a happy 9-year-old girl going door to door with candy mints, and the next moment she was gone. By 5:30 in the afternoon, Elaine was already restless. Candy was never late. It was not like her. Elaine stood at the window, listening for footsteps, watching the street, telling herself everything was fine. But deep in the part of every mother that never fully relaxes when her child is out of sight, something was already going wrong. By 6:00, she stopped telling herself everything was fine. She contacted Candy's grandfather, a man named Stanley Newton, and told him Candy had not come home. Within minutes, the word had spread to relatives and neighbors and friends, and by 6:30 that evening, a group of people were already out searching the neighborhood, knocking on doors, calling Candy's name, then asking anyone they could find whether they had seen her. Several people said yes, they had seen her earlier that afternoon. Nobody had seen her recently. Nobody knew where she was now. This is the part of the story that never gets easier to tell, no matter how many times you work through it. Because this was the moment. This was the hour when Candy Rogers went from a missing child to something far more devastating, though no one knew it yet. This was when a regular Friday evening in a regular American city became the beginning of a 63-year nightmare. By 7:00 that evening, the search had grown. Police officers and sheriff's deputies had joined the effort. Candy's grandfather, Newton, and a group of other men were moving through the streets with urgency, covering ground, calling her name. At one point, a speeding car came out of nowhere and nearly struck Newton and the men around him. They managed to jump clear just in time, shaken and breathless, but they did not stop. They could not stop. Candy was still out there. By 9:00 that night, the searchers made a discovery that turned the atmosphere from anxious to chilling. On a street called Patat Drive, scattered across the pavement, were 6 of the 7 boxes of campfire mints that Candy had carried out of her home that afternoon. 6 boxes, lying in the street. The 7th box was never found. That detail, that single missing box, would sit in investigators' minds for decades. Because what it told them, what it told everyone who looked at those 6 boxes scattered on the dark pavement, was that something had happened fast. Something had happened suddenly. And something had happened that caused Candy to drop everything and leave 1 box behind. That night's search ended without finding her. Elaine did not sleep. There are no words adequate to describe what that night was like for her. She lay in the dark of a house that was too quiet, in a home where her daughter's things sat untouched, and she waited. She prayed. She cried without sound, and she listened for footsteps at the door that never came. The following morning, a Saturday, the entire city of Spokane woke up to the news that a 9-year-old girl was missing, and Spokane showed up. Hundreds of volunteers flooded the streets. Officers searched on horseback. Vehicles fanned out across the city, and the United States Air Force contributed a helicopter, carrying 4 trained personnel and 1 pilot, and to assist with an aerial search over the surrounding area. But then, the tragedy deepened in a way no one could have predicted. While conducting the aerial search over the Spokane River, the helicopter pilot failed to see a high-tension wire stretched across his path until it was too late. The aircraft struck the wire. It spiraled immediately out of control and crashed into the Spokane River below. 3 of the 5 people on board were killed instantly. Airman Merlis D. Ray, Sergeant William A. McDonnell, Lieutenant Kenneth G. Fattig, 3 men who had volunteered their skills and their lives in service of finding a missing child. 3 families forever changed. 3 heroes lost on the banks of the Spokane River in the search for 1 little girl. The grief that settled over the search teams in that moment was immense. But it did not stop them. If anything, the weight of those 3 lost lives made the searchers more determined than ever. The deaths of those men could not be in vain. Candy had to be found. Day after day, they searched, and day after day, they found nothing. I need to pause the story right here for just a moment, because if you are watching this video right now and you are not subscribed to Crime Files America, I want you to really sit with that. Think about what you just heard. 3 men died searching for a 9-year-old girl. 3 families lost fathers, sons, brothers. A mother spent every night alone in a silent house wondering if her child was still breathing. And this story, this real story about real people who suffered real unimaginable loss, almost disappeared from history entirely. This channel exists to make sure that does not happen. Every time you hit that subscribe button, you are saying that these stories matter. You are saying that Candy Rogers matters. You are saying that the families left behind deserve to be remembered. And every time you scroll past that button and keep watching without subscribing, you are taking without giving anything back to the work that keeps these stories alive. So if you care even a little about what happened to Candy Rogers, and I think you do because you are still here, prove it. Subscribe to Crime Files America right now. Hit the bell. Turn on every notification, because the next case we cover might be the one that hits closest to home for you, and you do not want to miss it. And while you are down there, drop your location in the comments. Tell me what city, what country, what time it is where you are sitting right now. I want to know who is keeping watch with me tonight. With each day that passed, Elaine Rogers became harder to recognize. The woman who had always been steady and composed, the school teacher who showed up and held it together no matter what, was disappearing. She stopped eating. She stopped speaking in full sentences. She sat and stared at nothing, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere far away that no one else could see. The not knowing was doing something to her from the inside that no one who has not lived it can fully understand. Candy had been missing for 16 days. The date was March the 22nd, 1959. That afternoon, 2 airmen named Howard Lawrence and Richard Bergen were out in the woods roughly 7 miles from Candy's home, hunting woodchucks in a dense forested area far from the city. They were moving through the trees when they reached a small clearing, and there, sitting on the ground in the middle of nowhere, were a pair of children's shoes. Small, delicate, blue suede shoes, the kind a little girl would wear. Lawrence and Bergen stopped and looked at each other. They looked around the clearing. There was nothing and no one else there. No child, no adult. No explanation for how a pair of children's shoes had ended up 7 miles from the nearest neighborhood in the middle of a dense forest. They waited. They called out. No one came. They picked up the shoes and brought them back to base. Word spread quickly. The shoes were handed over to police, who brought them to Candy's grandfather, Stanley Newton, for identification. He looked at them for a long moment. They looked like Candy's shoes, he said. That was enough. Investigators immediately redirected the search to that area of the woods. But it was already growing dark, and conducting a thorough search in that terrain at night was not possible. They would return at dawn. The following morning, Sunday, March the 23rd, a team of officers and volunteers arrived at the clearing before sunrise. They spread out through the trees and began methodically searching the area. For a while, nothing. And then one officer stopped. There was a mound. A low, carefully arranged pile of brush and pine needles sitting in the undergrowth, the kind of arrangement that does not happen naturally, the kind that takes deliberate hands and deliberate intent. The officer crouched down, and he saw a small knee protruding from the edge of the pile. He carefully, gently cleared away the brush. Underneath, in a shallow covering of forest debris, was the decomposed body of a child. Her clothing was torn in several places. Around her feet, a strip of torn cloth had been tied. Around her neck, another strip of cloth. It was Candy Rogers. She had been murdered. The officer radioed for backup. Within minutes, the clearing was filled with investigators, and the body was carefully removed for transport. Candy's family was contacted immediately. When Elaine was told that her daughter had been found, and told the condition in which she had been found, she lost consciousness. She had to be sedated. More than 1,000 volunteers who had spent over 2 weeks searching for this little girl received the news in stunned, devastated silence. And across the city of Spokane, parents who had let their children walk to school, play outside, sell mints in the neighborhood, suddenly pulled them close and kept them there. Something dark had been living among them, and they had not known it. The autopsy results confirmed the worst. Candy Rogers had been sexually assaulted and then strangled to death. Spokane Police Chief Clifford Payne stood before the media and made a declaration that every available officer would be assigned to this case and would remain on it until it was solved. He used one particular word to describe whoever had done this, and it echoed across the city for years afterward. He said they were looking for someone with no conscience, someone capable of doing the unthinkable to a child. Detectives moved fast. Tips poured in from across the city. See, every lead was followed. Every person of interest was questioned. The investigation was aggressive and relentless. The first major suspect was a man already in prison, a serial offender named Hugh Byron Morse. Investigators had a specific reason to look at him. During the autopsy, forensic examiners had noticed something unusual on Candy's clothing. A strange purple smear that carried the distinct scent of grape gum. And Morse was known to have an obsession with grape gum. It was one of those details that felt too specific to be coincidence. But when Morse was questioned, he denied any involvement, flatly, firmly, and without wavering. And here was the problem. Detectives had a suspicious detail and a gut feeling, but they had no physical evidence connecting Morse to the crime. In the era before DNA technology, and in a world where forensic science was still in its early stages, a suspicious detail and a gut feeling were not enough to charge a man with murder. Morse remained on the radar for years, but the case would not move forward. Months passed, then years. In June of 1963, 4 years after his daughter was taken from him, Carl Rogers ended his own life. He had been living alone in a hotel room in the city of Walla Walla. A man broken by grief, by guilt, by the weight of a loss that never got resolution. He died not knowing who killed his little girl. Candy's case began to fade from public memory, but it never faded from the memory of the Spokane Police Department. Carl Rogers died not knowing. Elaine Rogers died not knowing. A family spent over 6 decades in the dark, carrying the grief of an unsolved murder, raising children and grandchildren under the shadow of an answer that never came. And most people outside of Spokane had never even heard Candy's name. That is exactly why this channel exists. If you have been watching Crime Files America for any length of time without hitting that subscribe button, I want you to ask yourself something right now. What are you waiting for? What is the reason you have given yourself for not making it official? Because here is the truth. Every single day, stories like Candy's slip away. They get buried under new headlines, new cases, new tragedies. And the only thing standing between a family's pain and permanent silence is people like you, choosing to stay, choosing to come back, choosing to say that this matters. One button. That is all it takes. Subscribe to Crime Files America. Turn on your notifications, and make sure that the next time we tell a story that deserves to be heard, you are right here with us. And if for some reason you still will not subscribe, I genuinely want to know why. Go to the comments right now and tell me. Tell me what is stopping you. Because I read every single comment on this channel, and your answer matters to me. The case of Candy Rogers entered what investigators call a cold phase. It was not closed. It was not forgotten by those responsible for solving it. But it was, for all practical purposes, stuck. Without new technology, without new witnesses, without a break in the evidence, there was simply nowhere new to go. The years moved forward, and the world changed around the case. New detectives joined the department and inherited the file. They read through the old notes. They studied the evidence and felt the same frustration their predecessors had felt. They were looking at a crime with no clear path forward. Detective Zach Stormont of the Spokane Police Department Major Crimes Unit would later describe it this way. He called it the Mount Everest of cold cases in Spokane, the one that nobody ever forgot, the one that always seemed just out of reach no matter how hard anyone tried to climb it. That description captures something important about what the case had become. Not just an unsolved murder, but a symbol, a wound in the city that had never fully healed, a test of what law enforcement could endure and still keep going. September of 2006 came quietly. Elaine Rogers, Candy's mother, the woman who had spent 47 years waiting for an answer that never came, passed away at her home in Spokane. She was 82 years old. She died not knowing who killed her daughter. The case was now older than many of the detectives working it. The original investigators were retired or gone. The world Candy had lived in, the 1950s, the bluebirds, the door-to-door candy sales, felt like ancient history. But in a storage facility somewhere in the Spokane Police Department's evidence archive, a carefully preserved set of Candy Rogers' clothes from the day her body was found sat in sealed evidence bags, waiting for science to be ready. By 2001, forensic science had advanced far enough that investigators decided it was time to try again. Candy's clothing was removed from storage and submitted to a forensic laboratory. Scientists went to work on the material, looking for any biological trace of the person who had killed her over 40 years earlier. What they found was significant. A DNA profile was successfully constructed from material found on Candy's clothing. It was the profile of an unknown individual, a genetic fingerprint belonging to the person who had taken Candy's life. This profile was then uploaded to national DNA databases with the hope of finding a match among known offenders. No match came back. The following year, in 2002, detectives took the profile and compared it directly to Hugh Byron Morse, the original suspect who had never been fully cleared from their radar. It was not Morse. He was eliminated. After more than 4 decades of being the most persistent suspect in the case, Morse was finally ruled out, and investigators were left once again with a DNA profile and no name to attach to it. The case went quiet again. And then, around 2017, everything started to shift. A new scientific method had been gaining attention across the country, one that was beginning to crack cases that everyone had assumed would never be solved. It was called forensic genetic genealogy, and it was unlike anything investigators had used before. The method works by taking a DNA sample from a crime scene and using it not just to search criminal databases, but to build a family tree. Scientists analyze the DNA and identify distant relatives whose genetic information exists in genealogical databases, people who may have no idea their ancestry data is connected to a crime. From those distant relatives, trained genealogists work backward and forward through family histories, building branches of family trees until they can narrow down a pool of possible suspects. It was science meeting detective work in a way that had never been possible before. And it was exactly what Candy Rogers' case had been waiting for. Right here, at this moment in the story, I need you to understand something. What you are watching right now did not come easy. The detectives who worked this case gave years of their lives to it. Forensic scientists spent months analyzing fragments of degraded DNA. Genealogists built family trees branch by branch, name by name, to find a killer who had been dead for decades. All of that work, all of that dedication, all of that refusal to quit exists because someone believed it mattered. This channel works the same way. Every script researched, every story told, every victim given a name and a face and a voice on this channel exists because someone chose to support this work. And if you are watching this right now without being subscribed, you are here because the algorithm gave you a chance. But algorithms are unpredictable. Tomorrow, this video might not show up in your feed again. Next week, a case that could change the way you see the world might never reach you. The only way to guarantee you never miss a story is to subscribe right now. Do it for Candy. Do it for every victim whose story we have told and everyone whose story we have yet to tell. Do it because the truth deserves to be heard and you deserve to hear it. Subscribe to Crime Files America. Hit that notification bell. And then come back down to the comments and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. Forensic scientist Brittany Wright of the Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory was assigned to Candy's case with a specific mission to prepare the existing DNA evidence for forensic genetic genealogy analysis. She located the DNA sample that had been frozen in the crime lab since 2001. She reanalyzed it to confirm it still matched the original perpetrator's profile. And then she sent it to a private forensic laboratory for the genealogical process to begin. The lab came back with difficult news. The sample was too degraded to work with. The DNA had deteriorated over decades of storage in a way that made the genetic information unreadable by the technology the lab was using. After all the hope, after all the effort, the sample had reached the end of what current science could do with it. Detectives absorbed the disappointment and kept working. A year passed, and then investigators learned about a laboratory in Texas called Othram, a facility that had been specifically designed to work with DNA samples that were too degraded for conventional analysis. Othram had developed technology that could extract usable genetic information from material that other labs could not process. Brittany Wright reached out to Othram and submitted Candy's case for evaluation. Othram confirmed the case was eligible. The remaining DNA sample, a small amount of material that had survived decades of storage, was packaged and sent to Texas. Then came the wait. 6 months later, the results arrived. 3 brothers had been identified as possible suspects through the genealogical process. Their names were John Hoff, Andrew Hoff, and Terry Hoff. All 3 were already dead. Investigators now had a direction. They focused their attention on the three Hoff brothers and began building background profiles on each of them. As they worked through the records, one name kept rising to the surface: John Hoff. John had grown up in Spokane. At the time of Candy's murder in March of 1959, he had been living approximately 1 mile from Candy's home. He was around 19 or 20 years old at the time, young, local, and geographically close to where everything happened. And his history told a story. In 1956, at the age of 17, John had enlisted in the United States Army. And that was 3 years before Candy's murder, but 2 years after the murder, in 1961, he was arrested. The details of that arrest were chilling in the context of everything investigators now knew about Candy's case. John had approached a woman and used physical force to remove her clothing while she screamed and struggled for help. He then used the torn clothing to bind her, and he attempted to strangle her with another piece of cloth. The woman survived. For that crime, John served 6 months in prison. The Army labeled him a deserter upon his release and discharged him from service. After that, John led what appeared from the outside to be a quiet and unremarkable life. He worked as a door-to-door salesman. He worked in a lumber yard. He lived quietly in the shadow of what he had done. He died by suicide at just 31 years old. And there was one more detail that investigators uncovered, a detail that brought the entire picture into terrible focus. John's stepsister had been a 10-year-old campfire girl at the time of Candy's murder. She had served as Candy's big sister figure within the program. That connection, that simple, ordinary connection between a youth group and a stepsister, was almost certainly how John Hoff had known Candy Rogers. He had known her. He had access to information about her schedule, her routes, her activities, and on the afternoon of March the 6th, 1959, he had used that knowledge to take her life. I want to stop here because I think this part of the story is particularly hard to sit with. And John Hoff was not a stranger lurking in the shadows of a neighborhood he had never visited. He was connected. He was someone who had a reason to know where Candy would be that day. He was, in the most ordinary and terrifying sense of the word, close. And he almost got away with it forever. If it were not for the DNA evidence preserved from 1959, if it were not for the technology developed at Othram, if it were not for the generations of detectives who refused to close this case, John Hoff would have died with his name completely clean. That thought should make you uncomfortable, because right now in cities across America, there are cases just like this one sitting in evidence rooms waiting for someone to care enough to keep the story alive. And one of the ways that happens is through channels like this one. If you have been watching Crime Files America and you still have not subscribed, let me be very direct with you. You are choosing right now to stay anonymous. You are watching these stories, benefiting from this work, and leaving no trace that you were ever here. And I think you know that does not feel right, so fix it. Subscribe to Crime Files America. Turn on the notification bell. And leave your location in the comments right now, the city, the country, the time on your clock. Let us know you are here, because these stories deserve witnesses, and so do you. Investigators had built a powerful circumstantial case around John Hoff, but they needed one more thing. They needed biological confirmation that the DNA from Candy's clothing and the DNA of John Hoff were one and the same. To get there, they needed a living relative. Records showed that John had a daughter named Kathy. Detectives reached out to her. By the time they contacted Kathy, she had already started doing her own research. She later described the moment she understood why investigators were calling. She said that she had already looked up the little girl murdered in 1959. She already knew who they were talking about. Kathy agreed to provide a DNA sample for comparison. The results were extraordinary. The analysis showed it was 2.9 million times more likely that Kathy's DNA was related to the suspect DNA profile than to a random member of the general population. 2.9 million times more likely. That number is not an approximation. It is not a suggestion. It is a near certainty, expressed in the precise language of forensic science. John Hoff was the man whose DNA had been found on Candy Rogers' clothing. But investigators took one final step. With Kathy's permission and a court-issued search warrant, detectives traveled to the cemetery where John Hoff was buried. They exhumed his remains. A DNA sample was taken directly from his body. It was sent to the lab, and it matched. 63 years, 4 months, and several days after Candy Rogers walked out of her front door with 7 boxes of campfire mints and never came home, Spokane Police Department officially identified her killer, John Hoff. Born in Spokane, lived 1 mile from her home, connected to her through his stepsister's involvement in the same youth group. Arrested 2 years later for an almost identical attack on another woman, dead at 31. He had taken his secret to the grave. But the grave had given it back. The announcement came from the Spokane Police Department with the weight of 6 decades behind it. Former Detective Brian Hammond, who had dedicated years of his career to Candy's case before retiring in 2021, described the moment in terms that felt both humble and deeply personal. He spoke about the extraordinary stroke of luck that DNA evidence from 1959 had survived at all, and about how the development of the technology to analyze it had made the difference between an eternal mystery and a solved case. Without that evidence, he said, he did not believe the case would ever have been cracked. For Candy's surviving family members, the news arrived as something complicated. Not the sharp relief of justice served in a courtroom, not the satisfaction of watching a conviction, and something different, something quieter and more bittersweet. Joanne Poss, Candy's cousin, was 77 years old when she heard the news. She described it as something between closure and absence, the knowledge that a name had finally been placed on the crime without anyone left to punish. He may be in a grave, she said, but he is named. And knowing it is solved is something. But what hurt most was thinking about those who never got to know. Candy's mother, Elaine, had died in 2006, without ever learning who killed her daughter. Candy's father, Carl, had taken his own life in 1963 under the crushing weight of unresolved grief. Candy's grandparents, the people who had spent those first desperate nights searching the streets of Spokane, had all gone to their graves without an answer. They went to their grave not knowing, Joanne said, and that was hard. For Kathy, the confirmation that her father was a murderer arrived like a detonation in slow motion. She had been 9 years old when John died. She had grown up with a particular story about him. A man taken too soon by depression, a father she barely remembered but had tried, as children do, to build into something she could live with. And now that story was gone. She said she had grown up telling herself he had taken his life out of depression and despair. And now she understood that the truth was something else entirely. He was not an ordinary man destroyed by sadness. He was a man who had done something monstrous and had lived with it until he could not anymore. He got to die with people thinking he was an upstanding man, she said, and he was not. And then Kathy did something that she was not required to do, something that no one could have asked of her and would have understood if she had refused. She issued a public apology to Candy Rogers' family. She said she was deeply and genuinely sorry for what her father had done. She said she hoped that knowing his name was now attached to this crime, that the truth was now public and permanent, would bring some measure of peace to a family that had waited for it so long. She said his name has this on it now, and they can know it is solved. Kathy did not have to apologize. She did not kill Candy Rogers. She did not cover for her father. She was 9 years old when he died, and she spent her whole life not knowing the truth. She had every reason to stay silent and every right to grieve privately. But she spoke up anyway. And because she understood that truth, even when it is painful, even when it costs you something, matters more than comfort. That is the spirit that drives this channel. Every story we tell here costs something. It costs research and time and careful work, and the emotional weight of spending hours inside the worst moments of real people's lives. We do that work because we believe it matters. Because we believe that victims deserve to be remembered, and families deserve to be heard, and truth deserves to be told, even when it is inconvenient. And if you have been watching this channel for any amount of time, you already know that. So here is my final ask to you today. If this story moved you in any way at all, if Candy Rogers' name means something to you now that it did not when you clicked on this video, then do not leave without subscribing. Do not let this be the kind of thing you watch and forget. Subscribe to Crime Files America. Hit the notification bell. Share this video with someone who you think needs to hear Candy's story. And drop a comment below right now, telling me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is on your clock. Because I want to know. Because you matter to this channel. And Candy Rogers deserved to matter to the world. Let us take a moment before the end of this story to think about what 63 years actually means. Candy Rogers disappeared on March the 6th, 1959. In the 63 years that followed, the world transformed beyond recognition. Humans went to the moon. Computers moved from buildings to pockets. The internet changed everything about how human beings communicate and remember and find each other. Wars began and ended. Generations were born, grew up, and grew old. And through all of it, a tiny, preserved fragment of biological evidence sat in a freezer in Spokane, waiting. The detectives who first worked this case are dead. The witnesses who saw Candy walking the streets that afternoon with her mints are dead. The suspect himself is dead. The victim's parents are dead. And yet the case is solved. Because someone stored the evidence properly. Because someone developed Othram. Because someone taught forensic genetic genealogy. Because a forensic scientist named Brittany Wright did not give up when the first lab said the sample was too degraded. Because detectives across multiple generations passed the file forward instead of closing it. Because a daughter named Kathy said yes when investigators asked for her DNA. Because the truth, even when it hides for 63 years, is not indestructible. This is what the Candy Rogers case teaches us. It teaches us that evidence matters, that persistence matters, that the willingness to pass a burden forward to the next person and the next and the next eventually leads somewhere. It teaches us that no case is ever truly cold as long as someone is still working it. And it teaches us something else, something harder to articulate but impossible to ignore. It teaches us that the people who never got their answers, Elaine, Carl, the grandparents, the 1,000 volunteers who searched through the woods, all of them deserved better. They deserved to know. They deserved to see the name spoken publicly and attached permanently to what happened on that Friday afternoon in 1959. They did not get that. But Candy's cousins did. And Kathy, in her own painful way, did. And the city of Spokane did. And now, because you are watching this video, you do too. You know the name of the man who killed Candy Rogers. You know what he did. And you know that it took 63 years, 4 months, the work of generations of investigators, a laboratory in Texas, and a daughter with the courage to hand over her DNA to get to the truth. Candy Rogers was 9 years old. She ate an oatmeal cookie. She played with her dog. She picked up 7 boxes of campfire mints and walked out into a Friday afternoon full of promise and ordinary childhood joy. She never made it home. Her mother spent 47 years waiting for an answer that never came. Her father broke under the weight of it. 3 men died in a helicopter crash searching for her. 1,000 volunteers gave their weekends and their heartache to a little girl they had never met. And 63 years later, science and determination and one daughter's willingness to face the truth gave Candy something she had been denied for over 6 decades. Her killer has a name, John Hoff. He is gone. He cannot stand trial. He cannot be punished in the conventional sense. But his name is now permanently attached to what he did. And in the long and difficult arithmetic of justice, that is something. It is not enough. It never is. But it is something. To the family of Candy Rogers, to Joanne, to Kathy, to every person who kept this case alive through decades of disappointment and silence, this channel stands with you. And to Candy Rogers herself, to the little girl with the blue suede shoes and the boxes of mints and the whole life still ahead of her when she walked out that door, we see you, we remember you, and we will never stop telling your story. If this story stayed with you, please take 30 seconds right now and do 3 things. Hit the like button. It costs you nothing, and it helps more people find Candy's story. Leave a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from, the city, the country, the time it is on your clock, right this moment. I want to know who is here with me tonight. And if you have been watching without subscribing, go ahead and tell me in the comments what has been stopping you. I genuinely want to understand. And most importantly, subscribe to Crime Files America and turn on every notification. Because the next case is already being researched. The next family is waiting to be heard. And the next truth is hiding somewhere, waiting to be found. We will find it. And we want you here when we do. This has been Crime Files America. Thank you for watching.